For 22 years, the most advanced diplomatic station in the galaxy protected a single empty chair that no engineer could delete, no government could claim, and no artificial intelligence dared overwrite. On the day 43 civilizations gathered to shape the future of the stars, an alien queen walked past emperors, admirals, and presidents, and chose to sit beside one ordinary human soldier. No one in that hall understood why. The truth had been waiting longer than the station itself, and by the time it was finally revealed, an entire galaxy would rethink what made humanity truly extraordinary. Welcome to Gravity and Stardust. We're so glad you're here. We hope you enjoy today's story. Have a wonderful time watching, and may your day be filled with happiness. Now, settle in, relax, and let's begin this unforgettable journey among the stars. The warning reached operations control at exactly 0700 hours. It wasn't accompanied by flashing lights or emergency sirens. Grand Concord Station had been designed to avoid unnecessary panic. Instead, a single line of amber text quietly appeared across the governance intelligence dashboard, interrupting 11 consecutive years of flawless system diagnostics. Diplomatic seating matrix conflict. Position 02. Reservation verified. Authorizing entity cannot be resolved. Chief Systems Engineer Maya Chen read the message twice before touching the display. Run the authorization chain again. The station answered in its usual calm voice. Authorization confirmed. Identify the issuing authority. Request denied. Maya looked over her shoulder. 3 engineers had already abandoned their morning checklists. One technician frowned at the audit log scrolling across his console. Maybe the registry is corrupted. Maya shook her head. Corrupted records fail validation. She enlarged the authentication tree. Every digital certificate remained intact. Every checksum matched archived backups. The reservation wasn't damaged. It was protected. Override it, another engineer suggested. Maya keyed in her administrator credentials. Engineering override request accepted. A brief pause followed. Then another line appeared. Insufficient authority. Nobody spoke for several seconds. That response should have been impossible. Engineering possessed unrestricted control over every physical configuration aboard the station. Lighting, gravity, atmosphere, docking assignments, diplomatic seating. If engineering couldn't alter a chair, someone above engineering had granted the instruction. The problem was that no such authority officially existed. Maya searched deeper. The authorization timestamp appeared first, 22 years earlier. She stared at the number without blinking. Grand Concord Station had entered service only 18 years ago. That can't be right, whispered the youngest technician. Maya didn't answer. She opened the construction archive instead. 4 software generations had replaced the station's original operating system. Entire security frameworks had been retired. Yet the reservation had survived every migration automatically. As though each new intelligence inherited an instruction none of them were permitted to question. Check the migration logs, she said quietly. Another engineer complied. Every upgrade contained the same note. Legacy directive preserved. No signature. No department. No explanation. Just those 3 words. Maya leaned back in her chair. Leave it exactly where it is. The younger technician looked genuinely confused. We're not fixing it. No. What if protocol asks questions? Then protocol can ask. She closed the diagnostic window without deleting the alert. Today's summit isn't the day to discover why someone protected an empty chair for 22 years. Beyond operations control, Grand Concord Station drifted nearly 22,000 miles above Earth. Cargo tugs separated from diplomatic cruisers with quiet precision. Orbital traffic flowed through synchronized approach corridors managed by thousands of autonomous guidance routines. Atmospheric regulators adjusted oxygen ratios for 43 visiting civilizations. Translation arrays synchronized 212 spoken languages before the first delegate arrived. Millions of systems performed billions of calculations every second. None reported a fault. Only Position 02 refused to behave like furniture. The anomaly never reached public news channels. Governance intelligence classified it as an internal infrastructure inconsistency. Even so, information traveled the way it always had, through cautious conversations between professionals who trusted patterns more than rumors. By the time the first diplomatic shuttle locked onto Docking Ring 3, 3 intelligence services had independently requested access to the authorization record. Every request received the same reply. Legacy directive. Access restricted. Inside the Grand Concord Hall, attendants aligned crystal place settings beneath the transparent dome while autonomous drones polished the obsidian floor until it reflected the stars overhead. One attendant paused beside the Imperial platform. This chair isn't listed on today's seating chart. His supervisor glanced toward position 02 without slowing his stride. I know. Should I remove it before the cameras arrive? The older man rested his cloth across one shoulder and quietly shook his head. If the station has protected that chair longer than the station has existed. He continued walking before finishing the sentence. Someone important hasn't arrived yet. Captain Ethan Walker arrived at docking ring 3:23 minutes before his shift officially began. Regulations required security officers to report 15 minutes early. Ethan preferred 23. 8 extra minutes bought him something schedules never mentioned: familiarity. Buildings behaved differently once they filled with people. He liked meeting them while they were still quiet. He stepped through the security checkpoint carrying nothing more than a pressed navy dress jacket folded over one arm. Around him, Grand Concord Station eased itself into the busiest morning in its history. Autonomous floor polishers glided across black stone until it reflected the ceiling like still water. Cargo drones delivered sealed diplomatic cases with mathematical precision. Environmental systems adjusted atmospheric composition by fractions of a percent as new species disembarked from incoming transports. Every routine unfolded with practiced confidence. Ethan paused beside a transparent emergency map mounted on the corridor wall. His eyes traced evacuation routes instead of decorative architecture. Primary exits, secondary pressure doors, fire suppression zones, medical stations, maintenance corridors. He memorized them without appearing to study them. Years in rescue operations had taught him that maps looked completely different after the first unexpected problem. Morning, Captain. An elderly janitor pushed a cleaning cart toward the eastern gallery. Ethan stepped aside before the man reached him. Morning. The janitor smiled without slowing. Big day. Looks that way. A service drone descended from an overhead rail carrying a crate of porcelain cups destined for the diplomatic lounge. Its guidance system compensated for crossing traffic one fraction of a second too late. The crate brushed the edge of the janitor's cart. White porcelain scattered across the polished floor with a sharp chorus of breaking ceramic. Nearby conversations paused. 2 logistics supervisors turned toward the sound. One frowned at the damaged inventory. The other checked a scheduling display already calculating replacement time. Neither moved. The janitor sighed and lowered himself carefully toward the floor. Before he reached the first broken cup, another pair of hands had already gathered the largest pieces into a neat stack. Ethan worked without speaking. He arranged the fragments by size instead of sweeping everything together. Sharp edges remained visible that way. Less chance of someone cutting a hand later. The janitor looked over with quiet surprise. You don't have to do this. Ethan picked up another fragment. I know. You're going to wrinkle that uniform. Ethan smiled faintly. Dry cleaners exist. The old man chuckled. Most officers would have walked around it. Ethan brushed fine porcelain dust into a collection tray before answering. Walking around a problem doesn't make it smaller. A passing station attendant slowed just long enough to hand him a cleaning cloth. Ethan accepted it with a grateful nod, wiped the remaining dust from the floor, then returned the cloth without ceremony. Less than 2 minutes after the accident, the corridor looked exactly as it had before. Only the cracked cups resting inside a disposal container suggested anything unusual had happened. Neither man noticed the private observation balcony overlooking the corridor. Queen Lyra had stopped there moments earlier while her advisors reviewed the ceremony schedule. She wasn't watching the broken porcelain anymore. She was watching the human officer return the borrowed cloth before adjusting the janitor's supply cart so its damaged wool rolled more smoothly across the floor. He never mentioned it. He simply nudged the axle into alignment with the side of his shoe and continued toward the security checkpoint. One advisor followed her gaze. Your Majesty? She continued watching until Ethan disappeared into the flow of station personnel. Yes. Should I ask security for his personnel file? Lyra turned away from the balcony. No. We don't know who he is. Not yet. She adjusted the cuff of one silver glove as she resumed walking. A file will tell me where he's served. Her voice remained calm. This morning told me how he thinks. Behind her, the janitor tested the cart's repaired wheel. It rolled straight again. He smiled to himself, then quietly continued preparing the station for guests who would never know that the first act of diplomacy that morning had taken place long before any treaty reached the table. By 08:30 hours, the Grand Concord Hall no longer belonged to architects. It belonged to protocol. Every movement followed a schedule negotiated over 14 months. Delegations entered according to treaty seniority. Translation arrays synchronized before each announcement. Even the station's lighting shifted in measured gradients as successive governments crossed the central aisle. Captain Ethan Walker stood at security position East 7, where two evacuation corridors met beneath the observation dome. From there he could see almost every entrance without becoming part of anyone's photograph. That suited him. Security worked best when people forgot it was there. The first arrivals carried themselves with practiced confidence. Presidents reviewed briefing notes while walking. Admirals spoke in low voices to military attaches. Trade ministers compared last-minute tariff projections displayed across translucent tablets. Autonomous cameras drifted silently overhead, selecting broadcast angles approved weeks in advance. Everything happened exactly as rehearsed, except for one chair. Position 02 remained beside the Imperial platform, unassigned in every public seating registry. Attendants walked around it naturally, as though they had unconsciously accepted that it belonged there despite never receiving instructions to leave it untouched. Across the station, Maya Chun watched the ceremony through an engineering monitor. A second screen continued displaying the unresolved system warning from earlier that morning. She had tried once more to trace the authorization before the broadcast began. The result hadn't changed. The governance intelligence still recognized the reservation as valid. It simply refused to explain why. She closed the diagnostics window. Some questions became more dangerous when asked repeatedly. A ceremonial chime rolled through the chamber. Conversations dissolved almost immediately. 43 delegations rose together. The massive bronze doors opened without a sound. Queen Lyra Valus entered beneath the soft white glow filtering through the transparent dome. Her silver robes caught scattered reflections from the stars beyond the station, while the pastel violet tone of her skin seemed almost luminous against the polished obsidian floor. Long, elegant ears swept back through white gold hair gathered beneath a simple imperial circlet. She acknowledged the assembled governments with a restrained incline of her head before continuing toward the imperial platform. 3 paces behind her walked Chief Marshal Wren and the senior imperial delegation, maintaining the spacing prescribed by centuries of court tradition. No one hurried. Authority rarely needed to. As they approached the platform, Wren lowered his voice. Your Majesty. Yes. Engineering has confirmed the seating anomaly remains unresolved. I expected that. Protocol requests permission to remove the additional chair before the opening declaration. Lyra continued forward without altering her pace. Did governance intelligence approve its removal? Wren hesitated. No. Then neither shall I. The answer ended the discussion before it began. At the edge of the chamber, Ethan watched the exchange without hearing the words. Distance swallowed voices long before it reached trained eyes. He saw only a brief conversation between the Queen and her marshal before both continued toward the platform. Nothing more. The Master of Ceremonies stepped forward. Her Imperial Majesty is recognized by the Assembly. Every camera adjusted simultaneously. Lyra reached her chair. Instead of sitting immediately, she allowed her gaze to travel once around the chamber. Diplomats interpreted the gesture as ceremonial acknowledgement. Military observers saw routine situational awareness. Ethan simply noted that she completed the same slow visual sweep every protective detail was trained to perform before entering a secured space. Then she sat. Position 02 remained untouched beside her. The ceremony continued. Opening remarks began. Trade forecasts illuminated the central display. Reconstruction initiatives rotated above the delegates in holographic projections. Yet attention drifted again and again toward the empty chair. Questions multiplied quietly. Had another sovereign declined to attend? Was a late arrival expected? Had the station made an unprecedented diplomatic error? No official explanation came. Even the governance intelligence listed position 02 with the same neutral status it had displayed all morning. Reserved. Authorization valid. Occupant pending. Ethan never saw the notation. He spent the opening session counting exits instead of chairs, which was precisely why he failed to notice that, from the Imperial platform, Queen Lyra never looked toward position 02 even once. She behaved as though its presence required no explanation because, to her, it never had. The opening declarations ended on schedule. The uncertainty did not. While delegates applauded the final welcome address, Grand Concord Station quietly began measuring the consequences of a decision nobody had officially made. High above the conference chamber, the governance intelligence compared every event unfolding below against centuries of diplomatic precedent stored inside the Alliance archive. The calculations finished in less than 2 seconds. 3 reports were automatically transmitted across secure government channels. Procedural variance detected. Imperial seating configuration does not match historical consensus. Legal review recommended. The system expressed no opinion. It never had. Its responsibility ended with identifying deviations. Interpretation belonged to living governments. Within minutes, encrypted messages flowed through 43 delegations. Advisors lowered their eyes toward discrete risk displays. Economic analysts received requests for scenario forecasts. Legal departments reopened sections of treaty law that hadn't been referenced in decades. Financial exchanges orbiting Mars, Luna, and New Geneva registered a brief rise in diplomatic uncertainty before stabilizing again. No markets crashed. No governments panicked. Institutions simply did what institutions always did when confronted with ambiguity. They started asking questions. Secretary Amelia Grant read the notification once before handing the tablet back to her deputy. What's the legal position? Nothing has been violated. You're certain? The charter regulates voting authority. He scrolled through another section. It says almost nothing about symbolic seating. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the things nobody writes become the most important rules. Across the chamber, Chancellor Varek requested procedural recognition. The moderator acknowledged him immediately. Madam Chair, Varek began evenly. For the sake of administrative clarity, my delegation requests confirmation that today's seating arrangement reflects an intentional decision rather than a systems malfunction. It wasn't an accusation. It was the sort of question responsible governments asked before signing documents that might shape generations. The moderator turned toward the legal advisory panel. 3 senior jurists consulted independent copies of the Alliance Charter. After a brief review, the chief legal officer answered. Current treaty language grants every sovereign delegation authority over its own ceremonial representation, provided no additional voting privileges are created. Varek folded his hands. Then the arrangement complies with existing law? It does. Even without explanation. The jurist offered a restrained smile. Transparency and legality are related concepts. They are not identical ones. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet by the time it concluded, the conversation had shifted. Delegates stopped asking whether the additional chair should exist. They began asking why someone had wanted it there badly enough to protect it for decades. From his security position, Ethan paid little attention to the legal discussion. His responsibility was simpler and far less visible. He watched movement. A translator unexpectedly switching briefing rooms. 2 catering attendants exchanging delivery routes. A maintenance technician pausing beneath an air circulation panel longer than scheduled before continuing on. None of it suggested danger. It simply became part of the mental map he built whenever people gathered in large numbers. Colonel Daniel Brooks approached from the western corridor without interrupting the proceedings. He stopped beside Ethan, both men continuing to face the chamber. Everything feel normal? Ethan answered after a moment. Normal enough that people have stopped watching each other. Brooks understood exactly what he meant. Public attention had settled on the debate surrounding position 02. Human attention tended to narrow whenever a mystery appeared. Ethan had learned long ago that the safest time to hide something was often when everyone believed they had already found the interesting part. Before Brooks could respond, every display panel suspended above the chamber dimmed for less than half a heartbeat. The change happened so quickly that most delegates continued reading their documents without looking up. Ethan's eyes lifted immediately. The environmental status icons vanished, then returned as though nothing had happened. Brooks followed his gaze. Power fluctuation? Ethan shook his head. Backup systems would have reported one. Communications? Too localized. He watched the indicators stabilize again. Every value appeared perfectly ordinary. Oxygen, gravity, thermal balance. All nominal, which made the interruption harder to explain. Brooks lowered his voice. Want me to call engineering? Ethan considered the question for a second before answering. Not yet. Why? His attention remained on the restored displays. Because systems don't hesitate without a reason. Around them, the summit moved smoothly into the next agenda item. Reconstruction funding replaced ceremonial speeches. Trade corridors replaced constitutional questions. To everyone else inside the hall, the conference had returned to business as usual. Only 2 security officers left the session wondering why the most sophisticated station ever built had paused for the briefest instant. Exactly when an unexplained chair had become the center of the galaxy's attention. The morning session recessed precisely at noon. Holographic agendas dissolved into transparent glass. Translation arrays entered standby mode. Delegates dispersed through the observation promenade overlooking Earth, where conversations became quieter not because protocol required it, but because the view had a way of making arguments seem smaller. From orbit, oceans ignored borders. Clouds drifted across continents without asking permission from anyone below. Ethan remained near the eastern gallery instead of joining the reception tables. Security officers weren't expected to socialize with heads of state. He preferred the distance. It allowed him to keep the room in view without becoming part of it. Around him, the summit reorganized itself in subtle ways. Economists migrated toward trade ministers. Military representatives naturally formed small circles near the tactical displays. Scientists gravitated toward the panoramic windows, pointing out weather systems and orbital traffic with quiet enthusiasm. People almost always found others who spoke their language, even before translators became necessary. Queen Lyra dismissed her advisors with a slight movement of her hand. They withdrew without question, leaving her alone beside the observation glass. She studied Earth for several moments before speaking, though it wasn't immediately clear whether her words were directed at the planet or the man standing a respectful distance away. It looks peaceful from here. Ethan followed her gaze. Distance helps. She glanced toward him. You don't believe appearances? I believe perspective. A cargo convoy emerged from behind the curve of the planet, its engine trails glowing briefly before fading into darkness. Ethan watched the formation adjust around civilian traffic without a single transmitted instruction. Good systems rarely needed constant correction. Lyra noticed where his attention rested. You watch movement more than people. People create movement. Most diplomats would disagree. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. That's probably why I'm not a diplomat. She almost smiled in return, but the expression disappeared before becoming obvious. Nearby, 2 junior ambassadors crossed the gallery carrying briefing folders. One lowered his voice as they passed. Are they meeting privately? The other looked toward Ethan and the Queen, standing several feet apart with no documents, no aides, and no visible agenda. Doesn't look like a negotiation. Then why is she speaking to him? The older ambassador answered before continuing down the corridor. Maybe she isn't interested in what he knows. His younger colleague frowned. Then what? Who he becomes when nobody important is watching. Their footsteps faded into the larger rhythm of the station. Neither Ethan nor Lyra acknowledged the exchange. An attendant approached with a silver tray carrying chilled mineral water. Ethan stepped aside before the attendant needed to adjust course. The man offered a quiet nod of appreciation and continued toward another delegation without breaking stride. Lyra observed the small exchange. You move before people ask. Ethan looked briefly puzzled. Usually. Why? He considered the question longer than expected. Because everyone's carrying something. She followed his eyes. The attendant balanced glass bottles. An elderly delegate leaned on a polished cane. A technician nearby maneuvered a cart loaded with portable translation equipment. Even the station itself carried millions of lives suspended above a planet. Ethan finally answered. Some burdens are obvious. Others aren't. Makes sense to leave people a little room whenever you can. Lyra rested one hand lightly against the observation glass. Where did you learn that? He looked toward Earth again before speaking. My father repaired bridges. She waited. He used to tell me the strongest structure isn't the one that refuses to move. Ethan watched sunlight sweep across the Atlantic far below. It's the one that bends just enough to keep everyone crossing safely. For the first time that day, Lyra didn't reply immediately. Instead, she committed the sentence to memory with the quiet discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime collecting truths that couldn't be found inside government archives. Before either of them could continue, a discreet tone sounded through every delegate's wrist display. The afternoon session would resume in 3 minutes. Lyra inclined her head politely. "Thank you for the conversation, Captain Walker." Ethan nodded. "Safe meetings, Your Majesty." She turned toward the chamber without looking back. Ethan remained by the glass for another moment, watching Earth complete another fraction of its endless rotation. He still had no idea why the Queen seemed interested in ordinary answers. Somewhere deep inside the station, however, the governance intelligence silently added another entry to an observation log that no human being knew existed. The afternoon session resumed with the steady confidence of a machine returning to work after a scheduled pause. Delegates reopened treaty drafts. Translation arrays synchronized once more. Above the central chamber, the governance intelligence quietly resumed monitoring millions of operational variables without attracting a single glance from the people depending on it. Then, at 1,407 hours, one routine asked a question no one had programmed it to ask. During a scheduled archive integrity sweep, the station compared active maintenance records against their original construction logs. It performed the verification every 6 hours. Usually, the process consumed less than 3 seconds before reporting everything normal. This time, the comparison failed. Archive consistency warning. Historical maintenance records do not match verified construction baseline. The report entered a restricted security queue reserved for infrastructure anomalies. Colonel Daniel Brooks received it first. 30 seconds later, Ethan's wrist display vibrated once beneath the sleeve of his dress uniform. He lowered his eyes briefly, reading only the summary before locking the display again. Brooks crossed the rear service corridor during a break in the presentations and stopped beside him without interrupting the proceedings. "Engineering says somebody altered maintenance logs." Ethan kept watching the chamber. "Recently, initial estimate says 6 months. Initial estimates usually improve." Brooks nodded. "Maya's running a deeper reconstruction now." Across the room, Queen Lyra listened to a presentation on interstellar freight corridors while making small handwritten notes in the margin of her briefing document. She never looked toward the security perimeter. Her attention appeared completely occupied by economic policy. Yet one member of her delegation quietly observed encrypted traffic increasing inside the station's internal network. "Your Majesty," the advisor whispered, "security has opened a restricted channel." Lyra turned another page. "Routine. Unclear. Then let them do their work." The advisor accepted the answer and stepped back. She had learned long ago that the Queen rarely interrupted professionals doing exactly what they had been trained to do. 2 floors below the conference chamber, Maya Chen reconstructed obsolete database snapshots from storage arrays no one had accessed in years. The deeper she searched, the older the discrepancies became. 6 months disappeared, then 2 years, then 4. The maintenance records hadn't been changed once. They had been adjusted repeatedly, each revision carefully replacing the one before it until the original history almost vanished beneath ordinary administrative updates. Maya contacted Brooks immediately. The timeline changed. "How much?" "First alteration dates back 4 years." Brooks frowned. "That's before planning for this summit even started." "Exactly." Ethan listened without speaking. For years meant patience. Patience meant intention. People willing to invest that much time rarely depended on improvisation. Brooks forwarded the reconstructed data. Hundreds of routine assignments filled the display. Air filter replacements, sensor inspections, lighting calibration, floor maintenance, cleaning rotations. Nothing looked extraordinary until Ethan sorted the entries by personnel instead of by equipment. A pattern surfaced immediately. Every modified schedule involved civilian employees, janitors, utility technicians, environmental engineers, supply crews. None affected military patrols. None redirected diplomatic security. Whoever rewrote the records hadn't been studying defenses. They had been studying habits. Ethan enlarged another file. The same maintenance card appeared in different sectors month after month. The identification number changed repeatedly. The recorded cargo weight never varied by more than 2 ounces. Tools don't behave like that, he said quietly. Brooks leaned closer. Meaning, real crews replace equipment. Ethan rotated the data projection. Their load changes every shift. He tapped the identical weight listed across dozens of entries. Whatever moved through this station. He paused, considering the evidence instead of the conclusion. It wasn't maintenance. Brooks remained silent for a moment. Smuggling. Ethan shook his head. Too visible. Surveillance. Maybe. His attention lingered on one final line hidden near the bottom of the reconstruction report. Several altered routes intersected beneath the observation gallery before disappearing into a section of the station marked Legacy Infrastructure. No scheduled access. He looked up toward the conference hall, where delegates calmly debated customs regulations, completely unaware of the older story hidden beneath their feet. Colonel, go ahead. Don't increase security. Brooks raised an eyebrow. You think they'll notice? Ethan nodded once. Someone spent 4 years learning what this station looks like on an ordinary day. He slipped the display dark again as applause rolled across the chamber following another successful vote. If we stop behaving normally. His eyes settled briefly on the architectural blueprint still floating above the report. They'll know we finally started asking the right question. Colonel Brooks waited until the afternoon session entered a scheduled voting sequence before asking Ethan to leave the chamber. Neither man announced their departure. Hundreds of delegates focused on treaty amendments while they slipped through a service corridor used by station personnel instead of diplomats. Grand Concord Station had been designed so security could move without becoming part of the ceremony. Today, that design worked exactly as intended. Maya Chen met them outside engineering control carrying a portable archive terminal no larger than a hardcover book. She projected the reconstructed maintenance records into the air between them. Thin blue pathways traced the routes civilian workers had supposedly followed over the previous 4 years. Ethan studied the image without speaking. I highlighted every altered assignment, Maya said. At first I thought someone was changing maintenance priorities. Then I removed the dates. Brooks looked at her. What happened? The routes lined up. She dismissed dozens of unrelated records until only a handful remained. The remaining paths curved through different sections of the station before gradually converging beneath the observation gallery. None of the maintenance crews assigned to those routes had ever reported unusual findings. None had filed complaints. Most never realized their schedules had quietly changed. Ethan stepped closer. What's down there? Maya enlarged the structural blueprint. A small compartment appeared beneath 3 layers of utility infrastructure. It carried no public designation. No visitor access. No current maintenance assignment. Only an aging engineering label remained. Legacy Synchronization Vault. Brooks frowned. I've worked security here for 6 years. He looked back at Maya. I've never heard of it. Neither had I. She rotated the blueprint again. The vault was built during station construction. Purpose. According to the original design files, it synchronized treaty archives while the permanent governance network was still being assembled. Ethan looked at the access history. When was it decommissioned? Maya hesitated. Officially, 18 years ago. Brooks folded his arms. Then why is it still drawing power? Maya brought up another diagnostic window. A thin line of energy consumption extended continuously from the station's opening day until the present. Tiny. Constant. Never interrupted. Too small for anyone to question during routine audits. Ethan's attention shifted from the graph to the authorization records. Who signed off on keeping it active? Maya answered with visible frustration. That's the problem. She opened the archived approval file. The signature field contained only one line. Legacy directive preserved. The exact wording appeared throughout the station's oldest records. The same instruction protecting position 02. Brooks looked toward Ethan. Coincidence? Ethan slowly shook his head. Systems don't repeat unexplained instructions by accident. None of them spoke for several seconds. Beyond the bulkhead, ventilation fans maintained the station's steady rhythm while delegates above continued discussing tariffs, reconstruction loans, and navigation rights, unaware that an entirely different question had begun unfolding beneath the floor. Ethan finally broke the silence. Let's see the vault. Maya glanced toward Brooks. Engineering protocol requires a full security team before opening abandoned infrastructure. Brooks nodded. Normally, Ethan remained focused on the blueprint. Not today. Brooks understood immediately. You think whoever built this expected a response. I think they expected routine. Ethan looked at the unchanged energy graph. 4 years rewriting maintenance schedules. Then at the persistent authorization. 22 years preserving one directive. Finally at the hidden room beneath the station. Whoever did this wasn't hiding from security. He met Brooks's eyes for the first time since leaving the chamber. They were waiting for someone patient enough to follow the pattern instead of reacting to it. Maya retrieved a mechanical access key from a sealed engineering cabinet. Unlike modern biometric credentials, it required no network connection and left no digital notification when used. The vault is 2 levels below us. She secured the key inside her jacket. No cameras? Brooks asked. Construction-era systems only. Ethan gave a single nod. Good. As the 3 of them entered the maintenance lift, the afternoon vote concluded above their heads. The treaty amendment passed by an overwhelming majority. Applause echoed faintly through the station structure, but none of them heard the result. They were already descending toward a room that, according to every official record, had ceased to matter 18 years earlier. The station's oldest systems quietly disagreed. The maintenance lift descended almost 200 feet beneath the diplomatic decks before stopping with a muted mechanical click. When the doors opened, cool recycled air drifted into the corridor carrying the faint scent of aging electronics instead of fresh filtration systems. The passage ahead looked untouched by modern renovations. Older alloy panels lined the walls. Emergency lighting glowed behind frosted glass rather than holographic strips. Grand Concord Station had grown around this level without ever replacing it. Maya led the way, her portable terminal projecting a construction blueprint that matched the corridor exactly. No automated inspections have been scheduled down here since the station opened, she said. Brooks glanced toward the ceiling. No cameras either. Only construction-era recorders. Ethan ran his fingertips lightly across the wall as they walked. Fine dust coated the surface everywhere except along a narrow band roughly shoulder height. Someone had brushed against it recently. Not often. Just enough to leave a cleaner path through years of neglect. He said nothing. 50 yards farther, the corridor ended at a plain titanium hatch secured by a mechanical lock older than any system still operating elsewhere on the station. Maya removed the physical key retrieved from engineering. No biometric scanner? Brooks asked. This room predates the governance network. She inserted the key and turned it. Metal tumblers answered with a heavy, deliberate sound. The hatch opened inward. No alarm activated. No security challenge appeared. Beyond it waited a compact chamber filled with dormant archive equipment arranged in careful rows. Thin layers of dust covered every console except one. Ethan walked directly toward it. The surface had been cleaned recently. Not polished. Maintained. The display remained dark until his shadow crossed it. Then, without being touched, pale white text slowly illuminated across the screen. Welcome. If you are reading this, you chose to look for a pattern instead of a culprit. Brooks exchanged a quick glance with Maya. Neither spoke. Ethan remained still, studying the sentence. Whoever had written it understood exactly how he approached problems. Not through instinct. Through observation. The display brightened again. Continue? No password appeared. No identity request followed. Ethan rested one finger against the confirmation icon. The archive responded immediately. No authentication, Maya whispered. She checked the operating log through her terminal. That's impossible. Ethan looked toward her. Why? Because it authenticated someone before we entered. Brooks frowned. Who? Maya stared at the authorization chain. The digital certificate carried the same unbroken legacy directive protecting position 02. The governance intelligence itself had quietly granted the console permission to recognize one future visitor. Ethan lowered his hand. This was never hidden from everyone. Maya slowly nodded as the realization settled in. Only from the wrong person. The first archive file opened without hesitation. It wasn't a classified intelligence report. It wasn't military correspondence. It was a maintenance request dated 22 years earlier. The request authorized continuous power to the legacy synchronization vault despite its scheduled decommissioning. The justification field contained only one sentence. Historical continuity requires uninterrupted preservation. Brooks folded his arms. That's not an engineering explanation. No, Ethan agreed. It's a promise. Another file unfolded beneath it. A sequence of software migrations stretched across 22 years. Every time the station upgraded its operating system, one instruction had been copied forward before every other archived directive. The governance intelligence had never decided to preserve position 02. It had inherited the obligation from the system that came before it. Maya looked up from the migration logs. The AI wasn't protecting a chair. Ethan finished the thought. It was protecting someone's intention. The final archive icon pulsed softly in the center of the screen. Unlike the others, it carried no file name. Only a date. 22 years earlier. Ethan hesitated. For the first time since arriving at the summit, uncertainty crept into his thinking. The message waiting beyond that icon had been prepared decades in advance for one specific individual. He wasn't entirely certain that individual was him. Maybe we're making the evidence fit the story, Brooks said quietly. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked once more at the migration records, the preserved authorization, the untouched machinery that had consumed power for more than 2 decades without anyone questioning why. Then he reached toward the final file. There's only one way to find out. The final archive opened without animation, without music, without ceremony. A simple construction era recording appeared on the aging display. The timestamp read 22 years earlier, before Grand Concord Station existed, before the Alliance Charter had been ratified, before anyone in the galaxy knew Captain Ethan Walker's name. The recording showed the interior of a civilian evacuation shuttle drifting alongside a damaged transport near the Keeler frontier. Emergency lighting painted everything in muted amber. Passengers waited in disciplined silence while rescue crews calculated how many lives a vessel built for 40 people could safely carry. A much younger lieutenant stepped into view carrying medical supplies instead of a weapon. Ethan watched himself move through the cabin with the unfamiliar confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned how history quietly followed ordinary decisions. He checked restraints, repaired a failing oxygen connector with a multi-tool, lifted an elderly passenger without looking for recognition. Then the recording reached its final boarding sequence. One empty seat remained. A little girl stood near the rear hatch wearing plain gray travel clothes without insignia or family markings. An evacuation officer quietly shook his head. "We're at capacity." The child simply nodded. She didn't argue. She stepped back to make room for someone else. The young lieutenant looked from the remaining seat to the frightened child. Then he removed his own restraint pack and secured it to the cargo rack outside the passenger compartment. Another crew member followed without being asked. A medic surrendered a jump seat. Weight calculations updated across the shuttle display. The margin narrowed to almost nothing. The launch officer studied the revised figures before pressing the departure command. Nobody applauded. Nobody called anyone a hero. The shuttle departed carrying every civilian aboard. The recording ended with a maintenance note confirming that emergency equipment had been replaced after landing. Nothing else. Ethan stared at the blank screen. "I never knew who she was." A quiet voice answered from the doorway. That was the point. Queen Lyra entered the vault alone. No advisors. No guards. No ceremony. She stopped beside the console rather than across from him. My regents erased every record connecting the Imperial heir to that evacuation. They believed anonymity was the safest protection. She rested her fingertips against the weathered console. They were right. Maya stepped back instinctively, understanding that the conversation no longer belonged to engineers or security officers. Lyra touched the next archive entry. A single authorization appeared, bearing the seal of the temporary construction authority that had existed before the station itself. Legacy Directive 02. Preserve one ceremonial seat beside the Imperial delegation. Maintain directive through every future governance transition. Activate only after Captain Ethan Walker independently confirms archival continuity. Brooks read the final line twice. It wasn't waiting for a meeting. Lyra inclined her head slightly. No. She looked at Ethan. It was waiting for certainty. Ethan frowned. "You could have invited me years ago." "I could have." Her answer came without hesitation. "But then I'd never know whether the man who gave away his place because someone else needed it more was still the man who would choose the harder path when no one was watching." The silence that followed carried no discomfort. It carried completion. Hours later, the final treaty session resumed beneath the station's transparent dome. Delegates returned to their places as though the afternoon had unfolded like every other diplomatic conference in history. Before the signing began, Queen Lyra crossed the platform and stopped beside position 02. This time she did not leave it empty. "Captain Walker," she said, "would you join the assembly?" Heads turned across the chamber, not in confusion but in expectation. Ethan walked forward without haste. He took the seat beside the Queen with the same quiet composure he had shown while helping a janitor gather broken porcelain that morning. No announcement explained the decision. None was necessary. The governance intelligence updated the seating registry in silence. Position 02. Status: occupied. Legacy directive fulfilled. 1 year later, Chief Engineer Maya Chen reviewed preparations for another interstellar summit. The old authorization had disappeared from the system at last. In its place stood a permanent designation approved unanimously by every member government. She closed the registry without comment and continued her inspection. An elderly janitor entered the hall a few minutes later, guiding the same weathered cleaning cart across the polished floor. As he passed the Imperial platform, he paused beside position 02. The chair had shifted less than an inch during the previous night's maintenance. He straightened it carefully, brushed an invisible speck of dust from the backrest, and continued on his way. No cameras followed him. No speeches marked the moment. Beyond the transparent dome, Earth turned quietly beneath the stars, while inside the station one place at the table remained ready, not for the strongest person in the room, but for the one who never needed anyone to be watching before choosing to do the right thing. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey across the stars. If this story meant something to you, we'd love to hear your thoughts, favorite moment, or interpretation in the comments below. And if you enjoy heartfelt cinematic HFY stories, be sure to subscribe to Gravity and Stardust so you won't miss the next unforgettable adventure. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and have a wonderful day.